How you doing, Sonia? You good? So, obviously, a lot of things you've investigated in the past. I've said this before to other people. So, in the past, we've had subtle corruption, but now we've got blatant corruption happening in front of our eyes. Now, after I had confronted Rishi Sunak, as we all know, with all these other scandals that have went on, they've swept it under the carpet because nobody's actually approached them and went face to face with them like I did regarding Rishi Sunak and trying to get help for people that have been harmed by the vaccine, people who have lost loved ones. My question to you is would you say that this is the biggest scandal in history, this regarding the vaccines? And would you say it's bigger than the blood scandal? Because in my opinion, 100% is. 100% is.
I'd have to say this is the biggest so far in my lifetime. I've never known anything like it. And it's the level of complicity that shocks me. And John, you're a perfect example, because when you stood up and confronted Rishi Sunak, right, how many people, I'm sure you've had this, were saying, he's a plant, he must have been placed there to ask that question because it would be controlled, right? So you know what it's like, right? The moment that you put your head above the parapet, you get it, right? Because people, obviously, they often have this idea that you can only hear about people if they're controlled opposition, which is absolute nonsense, absolute nonsense. That's an area, actually, that we need to tackle. But yes, in answer to your question, I think it is actually bigger than the blood scandal. Clearly, we can see, because we're talking worldwide. And obviously, the contaminated blood scandal only, and I use only very advisedly, because I don't use it in a way to minimise what people have been through, but it only impacted people who are having a blood transfusion, whereas obviously the COVID psyop, the COVID lie, the gene therapy was visited on the entire world. Yeah. And there's nothing else in my lifetime that can come even anywhere near this. And when I see people like yourself, people like Alex Mitchell, right, and what you've actually been through, it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And what's even more insane is so few people in positions of power have been prepared to speak out about it. Go on, John, you want to say something?
I just want to say thank you to you, Sonia, for obviously you've interviewed Alex multiple times, and if it wasn't for people like you, then other stories wouldn't get out. And many people in this might not know about my story, but I can tell you right now, this is the worst. There's no other word for it. It's satanic at this point, because I'm a survivor of this vaccine. It ruined my life. I've spent 40 grand to get my life back. Now I'm trying to get a voice heard for many others, especially the ones that are no longer here. But I just want to say thank you, Sonia, for doing that.
Pleasure. And thank you. And thank anybody who's prepared to speak out, because thank you. One of the experiences, my experiences, is it's often left to the victims of any injustice to fight. In the same way it was down to people who were dying from contaminated blood to raise the roof before anybody else would do anything about it. It's the same with and I'm loath to say vaccine damage, because it didn't, I don't think for any stretch of the imagination you can call that a vaccine. But so the jab damage, the gene therapy damage, the mRNA damage, which the what? Exactly. Yes.
My niece just lost her mother-in-law the other week, and she was looking forward to at least 20 years of her grandchildren.
Dear God.
I knew as soon as I sat next to her when she was coughing, and she said, I've got this cough that I can't get rid of. And I knew that the family had taken it, and I had tried my best to do what I could, and I had some degree of success with my brother. My niece was expecting at the time with another. So she passed away just 2 weeks ago at 63.
Very sorry to hear that.
And 2 other friends, turbo cancer. So I'm sure that's multiplied by however many. It's not about me. It's about what has been done and what we've all done.
Yes.
The incredible planning of all of this.
Right.
And the denial of it happening.
I've had people say to me, thank you. I've had people say to me, there's no such thing as the Great Reset. There's a bloody book. What are you talking about? Right. I think the level of gaslighting that we are almost constantly subjected to is one of the worst things. Obviously, we're now currently being told that we're experiencing a heat wave and asymptomatic weather, and was that not the playbook that they had us with the C-19, right? And that is act like you've got it. I mean, this was such, and I've talked to people who have greater understanding than myself about these things, such as Dr. Bruce Scott. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Bruce is brilliant. And Bruce taught me about menticide and what that actually means. And, you know, the sort of level of gaslighting that has taken place. We've been abused. They're abusing us. They've abused us. And the more we've remained silent, the more we have been subject to abuse. It's like a bully in a playground. The more you don't confront them, the more they feel empowered to come after you. And this is why, to a certain degree, just as an aside, I just have to say one of the things I believe in is accountability. And we don't get accountability with our political representatives, which is why when they were doing their pressers during COVID, it was a select type of journalists that they were allowing at these pressers, right? Because believe me, I applied many times to go, right? And no, that wasn't happening, right? That was not happening. But they allow people who they know is going to keep their official narrative for them. But what they've done in Parliament, I spent a good few years chasing politicians, right? Because I enjoy it. And one of the things that I enjoyed about it is the fact that I would be able to ask them questions that nobody else was asking them. I asked them off the cuff and everything. And so we would position ourselves outside Parliament every Wednesday, myself and a cameraman. And we did that for about 2-3 years. And because Wednesday is the day when they all show up, because it's Prime Minister's question time. The rest of the time, they're doing all manner of things. They're, you know, off with their mistresses or whatever, but they're not necessarily in Parliament. But Wednesday, you can get them in Parliament. But they've now created what is essentially a ring fence around Parliament, which makes it problematic for journalists to actually do doorstepping around Parliament. And I find those sort of things interesting. So they do everything they can to protect themselves from the public, right? And so when you hear stories of an MP being attacked, and I don't know whether some of them are true or whether they are false, but there's question marks over some of the MPs who we've heard awful things have happened to them, you have to know that that is also going to be used for a wider agenda, and that is for them to avoid accountability. And this Parliament, this election, there is a mass exodus taking place. They are out of there, so they cannot be held to account, and we need to be able to hold them to account. So John, just going back to your question, the COVID era is going to rumble on because we are still living with it, and they are still, the measures, they thought because they got us once, they think they can get us again. But honestly, even some of the people who are so conventional that I know say that there's absolutely no way that's happening again, right? So I do think the world is changing. I actually do. I think, you know, in the last 4 years, the world has changed.
Thank you, Sonia. With respect, I don't know if everyone knows John's story, but thank you for your bravery and courage and honour and standing up to Nike Sunak and for everything you've done. We're a bit of optimism here, optimism. I think there's a lot of people in the room who know what's going on. Going forward, the post office scandal is a great example. There's a brilliant journalist who's exposed it over the years, and it's taken a long time to come to fruition. Now, hopefully, if we all keep talking to each other and other people, and people keep pushing, the COVID scandal will be sorted out. Everybody will be held to account, just like what's happening with the post office. So we've got to go forward, spreading the word, and thanks to people like you. And Nick, I can't remember his surname, the journalist in the post office scandal.
Oh, so wasn't he from like Computer Weekly?
Originally, I think.
Yes, that's right. Yes, exactly. Because it wasn't even like a national newspaper or anything that exposed it. It was very much a sort of bit part player. But yeah, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And also, because you think you're slightly mad. When you're a journalist who's like onto something that nobody else is reporting on, you're kind of like, am I going to expose myself for being insane here? You know, so for him to have followed that through to the way that he did was, you know, phenomenal stuff.
And finally, they're getting results. And
yes.
It seems to be happening more regularly and more often that these stories are getting exposed. So everybody's help, we keep pushing pushing our MPs, etc.
Yes, keep talking. Each one teach one. Honestly, truly, you literally don't need a platform in order to be able to keep spreading the truth. And whatever your truth is, that's the thing. Is sometimes, I actually think that truth isn't subjective as it goes. I actually think that truth is actually black and white. I think that there is the truth and there is lies, right? So, you know, but again, my mind is absolutely open. If somebody in here said, actually, I want to take issue with something you said, I'd be like, let's do this. Tell me, what is it? What is it I've said? Let me find out your perspective on this. Craig, why are you laughing, mate? Craig knows me. Craig knows me. Craig knows me. But can I just say, Hugh, that's a really good point that you made there, right, about the fact about optimism, because we have to have that as well, because I believe we're in a spiritual war. Right? This is a spiritual war. So we're dealing with dark forces. I do think it is really as simple as good versus evil. And I see that all the time. And so optimism, it's not just optimism, because optimism in its own right can be a bit like, well, I'm hoping that things will be better. But I'm here to tell you that I absolutely know things are changing, because I see it. I see people on a constant basis who would never ever have talked about things like this before, going, do you know what? And even people in my street who did all the boosters and everything and all the lockdown and everything, clapping on the doorstep for the NHS and everything. I was an absolute leper during COVID, as you can imagine, in my street. No, they're brilliant. The neighbours are brilliant. But bit by bit, my neighbours have come to me and said, we're not doing that, no more boosters. And like, oh God, you were right about this. Like, shock, yeah, actually that's my job. But, you know, so the world is changing, and the world is changing because of people like us. That is the reality. You literally don't need to be a journalist or a broadcaster or any of those things to be able to spread the truth these days. And that is why they've gone after the internet, because they realise what a powerful force it is. And that was why they went after us with the online harms bill. And they're trying to bring in further, you know, the police bill. And the police bill is about not allowing people to assemble or protest against their laws. So they want to abuse us, and they want us to be able to be quiet about it. That's really what they want to do. But, you know, the fact is, I feel the atmosphere in this room, and that's what these gatherings do, is we are many. That's the thing, is there's way more of us than there are of them. And the thing that worries them is we're going to realise it. And it's moments like this, gatherings like this, where I feel the entire atmosphere in this room makes me shivery. I can feel the hairs on my arms stand on end, because we are the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot of people out there, and sometimes it takes people longer, because if you've been raised in clearly I wasn't raised in a conventional environment, right, as you've realised that now, but if you're raised in a conventional environment, then it can be harder to break out of that. But bit by bit, I believe people are. So yeah, absolutely, Hugh. We have cause for optimism, because things are changing, and we have the power. At the end of the day, we have the power financially, we have the power not to finance companies who are involved in any of these things, whether that is the LGBTQ alphabet agenda that we don't like or whatever. And just to be clear, I've always been an ally of lesbians, gays, bisexual people. What I'm not an ally of is spicy straights who want to sexualise our children. That's what I'm not an ally of. So, anybody else? Yes.
Yes. Hello, Sonia. Thank you for everything you do.
Pleasure.
Now, somebody else that mentioned Madeleine McCann was a guy called Gary Waterman.
Gary Waterman.
Yeah.
Gary Waterman.
Now, that's why I was looking up the chap's name. I remember he's an ex-policeman, and he's been talking about a whole lot of corruption to do stuff going back to Companies House. And I seem to remember there was some podcast or something where he mentioned your name specifically.
Yes, he did.
Trying to reach out to you or get you to take up his cause or whatever. So I just wondered what thoughts you had on.
Well, I'm really glad somebody asked me about Gary Waterman. So Gary Waterman suddenly appeared on the scene last October. He contacted me and told me he had the biggest story that ever was available, that I had never heard anything like it, and he's actually right. So this was last October, and immediately he struck me as somebody who was very domineering and very dominating, and he's an ex-cop, an ex-community cop. So he wasn't a detective or anything like that, and not to take anything away from community cops at all. I'm not a defund the police kind of person. Anyway, he'd left the police force, and so he has this theory, and the theory is that there is this giant fraud at Companies House. Well, actually, no, there isn't. That isn't actually right, because I looked into it and I spent time listening to Gary, and I spent time talking to Gary on the telephone, and one of the things that he said to me was that Madeleine McCann links to Nicola Bulley. So I said, talk me through it. And so what he actually talked me through was when we got down to it, was his link that linked Madeleine McCann and Nicola Bulley was Mark Williams Thomas, a cop who was reported on both cases. That is not a link, right? That is not a link, and that is how Gary Waterman functions. And because I went into detail into what his theory was all about, and he's very convincing, right? And he's telling a great story. I'm on the run. They're after me. I'm scared for my life. Actually, Gary, have you told people there's a court order on you because you didn't pay your service charge on your flat that you own in Bournemouth? I don't think you told people that one. And so those are the things that I'm interested in, the truth behind the narrative anyway, because I refused to interview him because actually it didn't stack up. The next thing I know, he puts a video online with the title, Sonia Poulton links to government fraud and child trafficking, right? So, and that was because I wasn't prepared to interview him. It's online. It's one of his most viewed videos, and it was only put online about a week and a half ago. Now, the problem is he has put my life in jeopardy. He's absolutely put my, because not only that, he's also called for an army of people to be arresting people like me, to carry out citizens' arrests. So this man has put a target on my back. And I have to ask why. Why is an ex-policeman who suddenly appeared out of nowhere making extraordinary claims about people, including somebody who has actually put... When Gary was busy telling kids not to cycle on pavements, I was putting my head above the parapet trying to stop children being abused by members of the British establishment. I'm not sure we're on the same page here, right? And so he came for me simply because I wouldn't interview him, right? And then, I don't know if you've seen an interview from last week with Stuart Menzies. Mark Atwood did an interview last week because this other cop called Stuart Menzies had approached Mark Atwood and said, what Gary Waterman is saying isn't actually correct. That is not how it works in company law. And I take Gary's point, right? What Gary is saying, the nub of what he's saying, is if an incorporation certificate has a different name to the company name, that's a fraud, right? Now, actually, what that is to do with Companies House switching over from a manual system to a digital system. And what they need to do is they need to update it, but it needs to all be input manually. And so actually, it's more errors at Company House. But when you take something like that, which I accept is it's not good. There shouldn't be those errors because it allows for confusion. But when you take something like that and link me to Epstein, there's a problem. I have to ask, who are you, Gary Waterman? Who are you that you want to put a target on my back?
I didn't realise it'd gone that far. I mean,
it's gone that far.
This was from probably a couple of months
ago. I'm so glad
ago.
you asked about that, actually, because one of my notes was talk about Gary Waterman. And I didn't, but you brought it up. And I think that's important. And the thing is that people have approached him and said, this is not... The Stuart Menzies interview, I really would advise people. An hour and a half, he broke down to Gary why Gary was wrong. And he actually used me as an example. Stuart Menzies used me as an example. He said, you cannot link her to Madeleine McCann, Nicola Bulley and Epstein, which is what Gary Waterman has done. That has literally put my life in jeopardy. There could be an assassin in this room, right, who could be out for me as a consequence. And my work has told me that happens, and I'm making it clear, and this is a recording that's going out. And Gary Waterman, if one hair on my head is harmed, I will throw every book at you humanly possible, because I do have to ask, who are you when you're an ex-cop and you've come out of nowhere and you're tarring and feathering somebody who's been here for a very long time doing this? So thank you for asking that. Yeah, as you can hear, I'm pissed off about that situation.
Since I've got the microphone, my other question is, I've just thrown my hat in the ring. I'm standing as an independent in Edinburgh, and I'm not a political person, but I feel I'm doing my bit to get something done. So, have you any advice for somebody? Maybe that's a discussion later. But also, is that something that you would consider? Because I think you would make an excellent voice for the people.
I hate politics. I think they suck, and I don't like politicians. So I probably wouldn't be great in those situations. I'm tired of leaders. I want people to know that we can lead ourselves. We need to find that core in ourselves, because people are misleading us. The thing is, no disrespect to you, I don't know you. In terms of advice, be authentic, because people are absolutely sick and tired of politicians who speak out the side of their mouths. And also, we need to change our political system, not just from a uni party. Obviously, it's all wrong. But I am seeing the rise in independence on this one, which is interesting, isn't it? Independence Day, that they called I think these things are always interesting. I'm interested in dates and symbology and all of those things, because I believe that there's a power in that, and I believe that the powers that be use them. So I think it's interesting, Independence Day. But be real, be authentic. And I think where people are so tired, sick and tired of politics, is we're promised one thing and then they get into power and they become something else. I actually think we need to properly introduce a law, and that is once they give us a manifesto, unless there is a really very serious reason, like the breakout of war or whatever, unless there is a very serious reason why they cannot fulfill the promises of their manifesto, we need to have it in law that these people will be charged and convicted for not fulfilling their manifesto, because they've sold us a dud. If they promise us that they are going to change A, B and C and they don't, that's a lie, and they got into power based on a lie, and they should be held accountable for it. So just be real and authentic. Can't go far wrong.
My friend Mark and I are well, Mark's come up with the idea and seconded by a small and growing group of us, but really we do want to change politics, and our slogan is do not elect politicians again, elect people.
I like that. Yeah. I like that. But again, as I say, I really think people need to remember who they are. You're sovereign, you know who you are. And our world, our entire world has been geared around making us forget who we are and what we're capable of. And, the incredible... Yeah, absolutely. It is bread and circuses. It really is. And that's why you feel an atmosphere in a room like this, because it's full of people who are actually truly progressive. And I don't mean progressive in terms of taking a drag queen into a Glasgow school or anything like that. I mean genuinely, truly progressive, that we actually want to see a change in this world. So, yeah, good luck with that. Good luck. Okay, anybody else? Mark, is this about politics?
Actually, it was really just to question whether there is any chance of regular people becoming elected and getting into power, because the impression that you've given us is that it's only possible if you're a paedophile.
No, I don't want to give you that impression. No.
So, what I've done is I've basically combined politics with the point that the gentleman made earlier on, and you've made as well, which is about talking to as many people as possible about the things that we know about and care about. And the more people that we talk to, then it's gradually going to sink in. And so a few of us have founded a new political party called Edinburgh People. And there's 5 of us who are standing in the election in Edinburgh under the same banner. We are standing individually as independents because the party, we didn't have time to register the party with the Electoral Commission. But the key thing is that, I've handed out a few of these leaflets, but the key reason why I went for having 5 candidates is that the Royal Mail will distribute 250,000 of these leaflets for free for us, starting a week on Tuesday, if we deliver 250,000 leaflets to Glasgow a week on Monday, right? And the leaflet does have policies, and the leaflet has policies, and the policies are trying to wake people up, right? So there's the policy on climate change, and if people read the policy, it's about waking them up to realising that it's not just about CO2. And then the policy on NHS and the health policy, one of the points is about the fact that in 2022 the government tried to impose a vaccine mandate on the NHS, and when they realised, it all fell apart. So that's in our manifesto, right? And we can print 250,000.
So, Mark, as opposed to this being a hustings, do you have a question?
So the question is to you, Sonia, right? Is do regular people like me and Jane have a chance for getting elected? Right. The second question, which is to everybody in the room and everyone that you know, is that if people join the party, there is a facility to join for 2 years in advance, and it's £5 a month. Right.
Mark, this is not sounding like a question, Mark. Right. This is sounding like a pitch. I think we all take his point, don't we? Thank you, Mark. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? No, I take your point, and I do absolutely no. Can I just state for the record, I don't believe that you have to be a paedophile to be a politician, right? That is not one of my beliefs. And but I do think that in terms of very senior positions within the establishment, you are often compromisable for one reason or another. So I think that might, you know what I'm saying?
And so how do you avoid being compromised?
Don't be a slime bag in the beginning, perhaps. You know, be a decent human being, and bit by bit, the authenticity will come through, because you know who's authentic. That's the thing, and people are so sick and tired of insincerity. We really are sick and tired of politicians sounding like they've just pulled a press release out of their anus, right? We're sick of it. We're sick of it. We're sick of it. So we want real people. So next one. Yes.
I could ask you a million questions.
You could.
Why do you think Madeleine's case will ever be solved? And why you've worked in mainstream media, why are mainstream media so scared of the case and aspect of the truth of what actually happened back then? Because they did start in 2007, moving into 2008, they did start reporting almost accurately. And then when the case was shelved, the truth was shelved, and then the case just became something totally else. And then the parents were able to give bizarre interviews. 2008 onwards, the 10th anniversary interview was crazy, but nobody talks about it. Why are mainstream media so scared to talk about the truth of what actually happened back then?
Great questions.
And obviously as well, do you think it'll ever come out?
I highly doubt that the truth of what happened to Madeleine McCann will come out in my lifetime. And I'm planning to live at least to 100. So I doubt that, because there's too many people involved in it. So that's the first thing. Secondly, mainstream media, as you accurately assessed, initially they were prepared to be much more questioning, but there was a key moment that changed everything, and that was an unprecedented apology on the front page of the Daily Express to Kate and Jerry McCann and their friends, and that changed the landscape, right? But see, part of the problem was mainstream media realized there was a problem with the story they were being fed. Initially, they were very, oh, this is awful, terrible, and felt a compassion for the parents, right? But there was also, they were compromised, because a lot of the people, which I talk about in one of my documentaries, Public Relations and Saving Reputations, a lot of the people in mainstream media were conducting themselves in exactly the same way as the tapas law. They were going on holiday and they were leaving their children in hotels and everything. And so they felt an empathy with them. And one of those people who did feel an empathy with them was Fiona Phillips. She wrote an editorial about how her and her husband had, they could relate to that. She actually talked about how she'd gone on holiday, taken their children, and they come back from dinner, and one of their children was screaming, running up and down the corridor looking for them. And so she felt an empathy for them. So it was hardly a coincidence that the very first show to air the abduction theory was one that was run by Fiona Phillips's husband, right? These things are not coincidental, right? But what happened was mainstream were taking stories from Portugal, and there was such a hunger for it, because they realised Madeleine was selling papers. It's a horrible exploitation, but they realised that Madeleine on the front page was selling stories. And there's a horrible expression that people use in newspapers, and not many people necessarily know this outside, but it goes like this, and that is, if it bleeds, it leads. Horrible. And Madeleine, as far as they were concerned, was a bleeding story that should lead, and they realised there was a lot to be had from that. And so what they were doing was they were taking these stories from Portugal, and some of them they weren't even doing due diligence on, and it was almost like it was a plan. Do you know what I mean? It was almost like we'll say all this insane, crazy stuff, and then that will be it. But I do believe that there were genuine newspapers, and actually the Sunday Express, because I worked with them extensively over a period of years, they genuinely wanted to get to the bottom of this story. But the problem is I believe that the tapas lot knew that the Express group was the group that was really wanted it, and they made an example of them. And after that unprecedented apology on the front page, and I think there was £750,000 or thereabouts that was paid out in damages, that was it. that from that point onwards, the abduction story rules. And you've seen what happened with Christian Bruckner when they announced that he was the #1 suspect in July 2020. Mainstream media fell over them. They still do. And I know Craig, actually. Craig, I should say, is an actual brilliant researcher of the Madeleine McCann case, and he's done some tremendous stuff, and he's informed a lot of what I've done. So thank you personally, because Craig is, and both Zoe and Craig, can I just say, they have a brilliant podcast together where they are methodically unpacking this story, and it's called Only Cans, and Craig was in it. I know, funny, isn't it?
Only cans, be very careful taking that.
Yes, I did, right. And Craig was actually in Portugal recently for the anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance, and so this isn't just somebody who has no clue about the story. This is somebody who understands it very well. And Craig and I throw things back and forth, but it is a good question, Craig. And I honestly doubt we'll ever get to the truth of it.
And the only other thing I just want to touch on as well is obviously Bruckner was being shoved down our faces for the last 4 or 5 years, especially it seemed, again, we all talk about things tying in, but COVID and everyone sitting in their house with nothing to do, that's when this all started. It was blasted as breaking news on your phone, Sky News, they had the ticker on, they had the live scenes, they had ironically sniffer dogs going around all his stuff, which we all know alerted actually to McCann stuff back in 2007. They could never, ever acknowledge a sniffer dog ever again, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
But then everybody suddenly forgot, right, when Julia came on the scene, Madeleine's alive again. So for 3 months, she was alive again. Do you remember
that? Madeleine McCann, the Julia girl from Poland, right? She was from Poland,
and I think
she?
that what I'm trying to say is that what I think that does is that actually is mainstream media exposing itself as ridiculous.
Yes.
Because 4 years of her being taken by this monster, and then all of a sudden she's alive again.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. Basically, unfortunately, again, I go back to that thing, if it bleeds, it leads, and they consider Madeleine one of those cases which Clarence Mitchell, who had been brought in from the government's media department, Blair's government's media department, to actually oversee it. I mean, one child goes missing every 5 minutes, but suddenly the whole political, the government is assembled to sort out this particular situation. So that's why everybody knows that there's something wrong with it. But yeah, Craig, I agree with you on all of that. I think, but you know what? We know people in here, and we are just literally the tip of it, but people are seeing through mainstream media. Why do you think it's dying? Why do you think a programme like Piers Morgan they cannot function as a TV? They have to go onto YouTube and pick up the streaming, because that is it's dying. It's absolutely dying. That is the reality. Yeah.
It's just a quick one, Sonia. General election coming up. Who you voting for? Best of the bad ones.
Wait, what?
What idiot are you going to vote for? Is there anyone at all that you could put? Do you think reform or the way forward, or what are you thinking?
So here's the thing, what I'm doing at the moment. I have a stream Monday and Friday, and what I've decided is, because most of any decent independent candidates cannot get any say whatsoever in mainstream, right? Unless you do a John, right? And that is, you hijack them where they are, right? And take over it, which was a great thing, incidentally. So what I decided on my stream was to bring on independent candidates who, even though I am completely disenfranchised with the political system, I was like, okay, let me bring on independent candidates. So Mark, you'll be very welcome, both of you, to join me on my stream, 10 minutes via Zoom, a Monday or Friday, and talk about your campaign, okay? So we'll do that. And so in answer to your question, at this moment in time, there is nobody that I feel able, because there are people in other parts of the country that I go, yeah, I like that, but obviously I can't vote. They're not people I can necessarily vote for. But when I see things like Reform, who look as if they're supposed to be alternative, yeah? Right, but it's insane. But, when you get something like a George Galloway, which I believe is probably truly independent, but there's a lot of problems there, obviously, because for a lot of people, it's like, we don't have problems going on in our own country. Why are your policies about overseas? So there's so much confusion and all that. But John, in answer to your question, at this moment in time, I won't be voting for any of them because they don't deserve my vote.